And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. And you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Lance Mortlock from Ernst & Young. Lance is an E&Y Canada strategy partner at the Canada Oil and Gas Leader based in Calgary. He was formerly the Canadian Strategy Services Leader and Director at E&Y. He's provided management consulting services through over 130 projects across the globe and has had the opportunity to work with leading national and international energy and utility companies. Lance has also authored a new book called Disaster Proof. So what I find interesting about Lance is he's clearly got an important day job at E&Y, yet he's found the time to carve out his own niche as a thought leader and put a book out. So you sort of straddle two worlds here. So let's first talk about what drew you into this. It probably wasn't lack of time. Like I have time to fill, and I guess I should write a book because I don't want to take up knitting. But what drew you to this?
Yeah, well, firstly, Peter, thanks for having me on your podcast. There's two parts to your question. One is, how did I find the time? I think I always wanted to kind of get a book over the line, and so you just kind of figure out how to squeeze this stuff in. So lots of very early morning starts and just got it done over a couple of years. And it was important for me, Peter, I'd say, to not only kind of be seen as a strategy partner helping companies with complex problems, but also a thought leader. And I kind of pride myself on having a perspective. And I really wanted to have a perspective on this particular topic. I think it's important, and it's really why I wrote the book and why I want to get the book in as many hands as possible.
So how do you balance then? Because let me sort of set this. In many instances, when you have someone at a firm like E&Y or any firm, it could even be the founder of a consulting firm or whatever the case may be, and they're putting out thought leadership, it's clearly done in service of the business as the primary motivator, right? So it doesn't make that good or bad. It's clear that someone in that position, it's logical. They write a book about the framework and the methodologies and all that stuff here. In your instance, it's not directly aligned to what your functional responsibility is, or even to what E&Y does. So how do you sort of balance that?
Yeah, like that's a deep question, Peter, and I figured you might go there pretty quickly. I think,
we only have 20 minutes. So.
No, you got straight to the point, so thank you for that. So it's interesting. It is the first thing I would say is, and I'm not just saying this because I have to. I think EY has been, as a global juggernaut in consulting, we're several 100,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing but supportive through the process. But you're right, like they don't directly get branding and positioning and credit for this because it's not branded and positioned as that. It's me, it's Lance Mortlock. But I do think that there's an element of EY looking at this and saying, you know what, if our partners and our leaders in the firm are better branded as thought leaders, it's all good.
So stay there for a minute. So there's two trends that happen here. One trend is we as the organization will get behind it, control it, fund it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The other is, we're afraid. What if they, it's sort of the old joke of, what if I train my people and they leave? And it's like, well, what if you don't train them and they stay, right? So if you've got a firm like E&Y that tends to have really smart people working there, because that's the only asset they have, right? Smart people are going to want to do fun, cool, interesting things. Sometimes it's dead on related to their day job. Sometimes it's not. So I see some parallels to sort of the Google free time, but giving folks freedom to do things. And I'm sure they didn't say to you, "Oh, don't worry, Lance, this year you don't have to bill any clients," right? There's supportive, lowercase s, and there's capital S supportive.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, great question. It's interesting because I think I'm a proponent, and I think our culture at EY is certainly like this. And I've worked elsewhere, and I know others that have worked in other consulting firms. I think our culture is, you can take the track of don't do this. It doesn't directly tie to selling services and delivering work. But the risk is if you don't do it, you're going to upset people and, and frankly, piss them off a little bit. And they're going to leave and go and do it anyway. So that's not a good outcome for any firm. And I always feel like, in our culture at EY, our leadership team has always encouraged this kind of stuff. And an example of that, Peter, would be, our chairman in Canada, and I don't think he would mind me saying this, he has been nothing but supportive. In fact, he bought a bunch of the books. He's using them with clients. And I definitely feel that level of support, but it could have gone down another road and it didn't, fortunately.
Yeah. So I think that's great for both you and EY, because you got to do something that it seemed like you were driving to do this. There was something calling you to say, got to get this book out, got to get this book out, and nothing calling you that says, and I have to leave here, right? Because those are two totally different pieces. And I think oftentimes firms, either they're afraid they'll create, a monster in a good way, like someone will get too big for their britches, but it's a win-win. I think it is, kudos to the firm for saying, yeah, we've, here's some things that our folks do. They write books in their free time. They're master chess players. They're downhill ski, whatever the it is, but I think.
And it was interesting because when you and I were kind of prepping for this conversation a few weeks ago, you kind of asked me a bunch of questions, and I was like, why is Peter asking me these questions? And what I think you were getting at was, well, normally when people do this, they're setting up to launch something different. And that's never crossed my mind. Like EY is a great company. I think our firm is great. And it's why I've stayed at the firm, a long, long time and hope to continue to stay at the firm long into the future. So I think it's a bit of an unusual situation by the sounds of it, but it is what it is, and it's been good so far.
No, that's fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about the process, because I think I picked up a few moments ago in the conversation a number of years it took. So let's talk about what the actual process of writing a book looks like, because I think people have this glamorous, you sit out on the deck with a cup of tea,
or gin tonic,
Yeah, right, or worse, right, or both. And then words flow, and it's easy, and la 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 la. But what was the process actually like to get? It's a lot of words in a book. Like, how do you do that? How do you find the time? Tell me about your process there.
Yeah, so I mean, a few things there. I would say, this kicked off for me. I've been thinking about writing a book for a long, long time. And I always felt as a strategist, I've been doing strategy consulting for 20 years. Like at some point, if I want to elevate the brand, the capability that I have, this has to come at some point. And, as you and I have talked about before, Peter, like I've written tons of points of view from, the DNA of the chief strategy officer to business resilience, 30 points of view over my career and extensively published in the media on a variety of business topics. And the beauty in a lot of the past work that I did, particularly around, points of view I'd written around integrated planning, strategic planning, thinking about the future, how you build business resilience. I'd written the bones of aspects that came together in the book in some of those pieces in the past.
So stay there for a moment, because I think this is a key point. Many people think that when they get into book mode, that, because books have deadlines and deliverables and there's other people involved or whatever, that they're starting with a blank slate. And the reality is something drew you to say, a book is just it could be a forcing mechanism to get you to codify all your thinking. It could be a longer way to tell the story and show what you've got to do than you did in the shorter form pieces that you did before. But I think the point that you just made there, which is a key one, is you didn't start with a blank slate. Although you started with a blank slate relative to you haven't written the book before, you had other assets to pull from and other thinking that you've done. And I would imagine a lot of that landed in the book. Maybe it got morphed a little bit or changed a little bit or not verbatim. What percentage of your previous work do you say was used or is now represented in the book? Is the book half new, half sort of rethinking of old thoughts, or just
Yeah, maybe a little bit less than that, I would say, in terms of maybe it's 30% old and or 40% old and 60% new. But I think you're right. I mean, you're spot on. Like the process of thinking through it was, yeah, like some of this stuff is still relevant, is still timely. I can integrate it. But then there was, a couple of years of new stuff that I had to think and develop and research, either through reading other books, reading stuff online, reading, scientific, academic papers, and it all coming together. And then in terms of the process itself, as a partner, I'm very, very busy. So literally there was one year, like last year during the pandemic, I was literally getting up at 4 a.m. every day and working from 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. to get this done. And then from, 8 a.m. the rest of the day doing my day job and what I'm supposed to be doing day to day. That was full on, Peter. It was incredible. It's been an incredibly tough year, and living in a pandemic as we all have been. So
that little inconvenience.
Yeah, that small thing. So yeah, like just a hard process to get through, but certain parts of it easy in terms of, I can leverage a bit of this and a bit of that and bring it together in a succinct way.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. So let's go back to that process. So I've heard all sorts of stories about folks. So it sounds like for you, part of this was a routine, right? You could wait for the time to come to you, or carve out, 4 to 7 a.m. is usually a time we're in the fetal position, right? Right. But you committed that time. And I would imagine that it was sort of a routine, right? It might not be the most pleasant one given the time of day, but you stuck with that, right? And was there trial and error there, or that's just, sort of how to manage time for you? Because everybody's, 4 to 7 might work for you. It might be a nightmare for somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, for those that know me and have worked with me over the years, I'm a highly, highly structured person in my life, almost to my detriment. And so that, like that routine of, this is my think time, this is my right time, and I'm going to just get it done and religiously go through it every day, day in, day out. That's how I got through it, Peter. And that's how I kind of balance, as a partner, as a board member, as all the different things that I do in life. That's just kind of what you do to get the things that you need done. And the other thing I would be remiss if I didn't say, I'm incredibly lucky to have a very supportive family who knew it was important for me. We talked about it a couple of years ago, and I said, look, I want to do this, but I need you guys to be supportive. And this includes my two girls, right?
Yep.
And my wife. I said, you need to be bought into this because it's a process. It's going to be a suck of my time.
And you don't want them to resent you exactly. The process. So I remember a story that a good friend of mine, who's a very well-known author, told me that, he did his first book and didn't carve out the time, was super busy speaking, doing all the other things. And it was always like, him and the publisher going head to head. Where's that draft? Where's that draft? And, pulling all-nighters and doing all this sort of crazy stuff. And when he got the second book deal, after the first book was a wild success, he said, okay, I'm going to be a little bit more mature about this. And I'm going to cut down my schedule 30%, and I'll do, writing weeks and, just do the opposite of that, because that was a little bit sloppy. Well, and push came to shove and the deadlines hit and there was still not enough done. And he couldn't figure out why. Like, wait a minute, I literally cut my schedule off by a third, which is a huge financial hit, opportunity cost wise, for a keynoter back in those days, et cetera. And then it came to him that actually most of his writing was done on airplanes because he was flying around so much. So he called United, which he was platinum on, and said, listen, I'm a million mile, whatever. I want to get on a plane at JFK Monday morning, and I don't want to come home till Saturday. Just zip me up in the air as much as you can. So it was like New York to Portland, Miami, whatever, like literally just fly. And he knocked it out. And for him, there was a ritual of being on the plane, putting on headphones, having a cocktail, not knowing the phone is off. That was his sort of place to write. So
I
the
know.
modern day writer's cabin at 30,000 feet.
I know what you mean, and I don't know if you were going to go here, Peter, but what I would say is, like, the last 12 months have been pretty unique.
Yeah.
Like, I also looked at it, as I was really, really kind of getting into the writing mode, and sort of early concepts were becoming much more like you could feel them.
Yes.
And I was like, well, we're in a pandemic, so we're in a bit of a unique situation where I'm not traveling. I'm not going to work on a regular basis. I'm not getting on a plane. I'm at home. So there was more of a window of time where I could, pump stuff out.
Well, I've been calling it for the last 6 months what I'm calling the COVID renaissance, because you take a bunch of smart people, give them more time back, and some of it voluntary, involuntary, even though you're still obviously busy at EY, just the travel, right? So I was doing 120,000 miles a year. I don't know how I fit that in when I look at my schedule today, right? So what happened is a lot of people said, well, geez, there's 5 books I want to write, or this research I want to do, or this thing I want to think about, or whatever. And we're starting just at the beginning. It's been the last 2-3 months where we're seeing some of the outcomes, your book being one of them, of what have people done. And it's not necessarily that the content is pandemic related, but wow, I finally have the time to do. It's the ultimate A/B test. It'll be interesting to look back in 5 years to see if we saw a spike of either public authors or because we'll all baseline to some new normal, whatever that means or doesn't mean or whatever. Interesting. So anything that you would have done differently or would do differently the next time if there would be one?
Anything I would have done differently? Yeah, I mean, it's funny, you kind of look at these things now that the book's out and it's released, and you're like, oh, what about this? And I could have done this. But I think that would have been if I write another book in the future, I think I'm always sort of that self-critical and will always look at something after the fact. And I've done that, through the projects I've delivered with clients and points of view.
The curse of the perfectionist, right?
Yeah. So there's always things, Peter, that you kind of look at and say, oh, I should have done an extra chapter around that. But no, I mean, overall, I'm very happy. I mean, I think the book is very timely. As we were just talking earlier about, coming out of the pandemic and things are getting back to normal for you in New York. I wish I could say the same for me here in Canada. But as things come back to normal, I think management teams, leaders are really going to say, well, that was pretty awful. That was pretty terrible. Like, let's look at the future now. And I think this is a great book for leaders and boards to kind of look at the future and say, like, how well prepared are we?
Sure. So last point I want to touch on is we've talked about the grueling nature of actually getting a book to the finish line. We haven't talked about the other side of this. So writing a book is clearly not an easy thing to do, particularly when you have high standards, you're perfectionist, et cetera. Marketing a book is a totally different set of skills that I would argue that most, like north of 90% of authors, writers, thought leaders, et cetera, it's just not who they are or what they're about or the capabilities they have. What have you learned or experienced on the marketing side of the book?
Yeah, it's funny you should ask this. I was talking to a colleague this morning, and we were talking about the marketing. It's a little bit uncomfortable, I would say, Peter. And as a Brit originally, I was never used to really pushing something and pushing sales of the book. And my publicist said to me, you need to be on social media once or twice a week. Like, what's the saying? Like, unless you get a message into someone's hands 7 times, they're not actually going to make a purchasing decision. And so that has been a journey, I would say, for me to really understand that you need to keep on this. And it's a slow, continuous burn of, what about this? What about this? Here's what we're doing here. Here's what we're thinking here. And that, for me, in my core, is quite uncomfortable. But I'm doing it because I have
That's
to.
What I love about it, because most authors are more, or thought leaders are a little bit more introspective, and thoughtful and research based. And now it's like you've got to be a bit of a showman or a promoter or what. I mean, it's like, ooh, I didn't become a consultant to do that, or ooh, it's But I think if you start to think about it in service of the book, because all that effort that went in the book is futile if it doesn't get in the hands of people. And the best means to get it in the hands of people are things that you could do in a way. And no one's ever come back to you and said, oh my God, stop selling, stop that. Right. And I think that's everyone's fear, is like, you're going to be that guy, but it rarely happens if you do it with authenticity and integrity and all those things. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I appreciate your time and your willingness to share your story and your journey. And thanks for coming on today.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter, for having me.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.